Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tech Leaders Livestream. For those of you who don't know, I'm Andrew Murphy. I am the founder of Tech Leaders Launchpad, who runs these live streams. And I started off my career as a software developer before moving into leadership and then into leadership coaching. I am now the founder of Tech Leaders Launchpad, which is an online resource and platform for helping technology leaders learn to be better. I also do these live streams. What I found when I became a technology leader was that there wasn't a lot of resources for people like me. This is 15 years ago. The books, the resources, the websites didn't exist that exist nowadays. And so I've made it my mission to help people in a way that I didn't get help without it. Part of that is sharing the people that I learn from with you so that you can learn from them. And in that vein, I have with me today Chris Simon. Chris, say hello to the people watching.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, no, you're very, very welcome. So Chris is a startup CTO coach. We'll get into his career highlights and history in a minute. But I have to start with my icebreaker, which is the ever wonderful, what's your favorite tech gadget that is not your computer?
Yeah, look, this I thought this would be it could be a difficult one because I've got a lot of tech gadgets I really like, but the one that's taking top spot in the last year is Exreal Air augmented reality glasses. And if people haven't seen those, you literally look like you're wearing a pair of sunglasses, but it's got very small little screens that are vertically sort of horizontally oriented, and they project down and then through a lens so that you can actually see the world through the screen, but it looks like it's floating in space in front of you. And because I do quite a lot of travel, I watch movies and TV shows on these things, and it feels like you're watching a cinema screen, even though you're sitting in the back of an airplane. It's pretty amazing. I love them.
Yeah, we were saying just in the pre-show that both of us have got a lot of flying coming up, kind of to conferences and for personal reasons, and just that ability to sit on a plane seat and have a large screen in front of you is something that I just find incredibly appealing. Yeah, awesome. All right, do you want to give us a little bit of your potted history, Chris? Like, why are we talking to you? Why did you get to hear? What's your background and history?
Yeah, so my I've always been in technology. Taught myself to code as a teenager, and I think a lot of people have that experience, and I think more and more these days, which is very exciting. But I went to university, did electrical engineering, not because I would have preferred to do computer science, but randomly got a scholarship to do electrical engineering, so I did that one. But pretty quickly realized that it was still programming, and computers was where my heart was. And I had an opportunity probably about, it's coming up on almost 20 years ago now, to start a company with a friend and his brother. So the three of us kicked off a business based out of Sydney in 2005. And it was startups existed then. Obviously, there had been startups through the 90s and the early 2000s, but it was nothing like it is today. There was very few on-ramps. The VC ecosystem didn't exist. It was a very, very different world. But, we gave it a crack. We sort of got things started, and things went pretty well. The business we started then is still operating. It's called Flexi Schools. A lot of parents use it to order their kids' lunches from their school canteens. I'm pretty proud of the role I played in sort of helping get that going. My experience there, starting as like a developer in a startup, but with the title of CTO, is something that has informed the way I kind of think about these things these days, and try and help other startups, because there's a lot of I'd say confusion, or there's a lot of mixed opinions about what it means to be a CTO in a startup. And I see people publishing articles these days saying your startup doesn't need a CTO, you just need a lead developer, or the CTO title's inflated when you have a startup because they're just cutting code. And I have some sympathy for that, but I also think there's things you can do to make it actually make yourself worthy of the CTO title. That's kind of what I try and bring to it. But I guess to get back to my career history, so we were pretty small for quite a while, and then it started to grow through like the early 2010s until by the 2015 it was pretty self-sustaining, and we actually launched a second business called Launchpad, which is a healthcare insurance payment platform. And I got to sort of kick that off. It was better funded, so we had a bigger team from the start and got to grow that team again. And that culminated in actually selling that business to one of Australia's big four banks a couple of years ago, which was a very nice outcome for everybody. And so now I sort of transitioned into independent work, consulting, coaching, training, and I operate, I guess, at a mixture of levels. So with startups, I do a lot of coaching of the technical leadership and helping them set up some sort of strong technical foundations for growing their business and their product. With bigger businesses, I tend to focus more on like architecture and design. So do a lot of domain-driven design work, training, coaching, consulting. That's like, and I've got a few bits and pieces where I provide some advisory things to executives. I'm on a few steering committees and stuff like that, which is, it's interesting, it's fun. But I would say my passion and what I really love doing is working with first-time CTOs, especially in the startup context, and then engaging with like really complex domains and tricky solution design problems, because that's a lot of fun too.
Yeah, it is. I love that stuff. We've got an hour with you today, Chris. So if you're watching this, remember to ask questions wherever you're currently watching this. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitch, just post a comment in the chat there, and we'll be able to see them. Hopefully, we'll be able to get through all of the questions you've got today before we finish. If we don't, we'll try and answer some of them afterwards. If you have to drop off during this live stream, don't worry. It's being recorded, whatever platform you're watching this on, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch. You can always just watch the replay again afterwards. If you're watching this anywhere other than YouTube, I would suggest you move to YouTube. YouTube is a much better user experience for you as a viewer. I will continue posting this on LinkedIn because I know some of you like that, but I do heavily suggest you move to YouTube. This is probably why I don't have a LinkedIn top voice. So I'm going to move on. I've got a bunch of questions for Chris today. Generally, what I do when I bring people on is I try and choose a topic that's they're passionate about. I want my guests to talk about something that is really deeply important to who they are and what they spend all their time thinking about. And straight away, Chris, you were like, how to stay adaptable. So why this topic? Why was this something that was really important to you?
Yeah, because, based on my experience and what I've observed, startups just change so rapidly. And, you're in this world where you're sort of lifting something out of the dirt. You're creating it for the first time. Sometimes you like really innovating, and creating something that nobody's ever done before. Sometimes you're sort of launching old ideas into new markets or new frames. But either way, there's a lot of rapid change. And what I found was that this need to be constantly shifting my mindset around like, what was my role? What was my purpose? How was I supposed to be acting? Where was the best space to, utilize my time? And what I found over the years is that like when I was kind of not really operating well or not contributing what I needed to, it was because I had kind of gotten stuck in, or missed an opportunity to transition my approach. And I think that, sometimes you see these businesses grow, and then necessarily the people that were involved in the start, have to step out because they can't change or they can't grow with the business. And, I think if that's the decision that a person makes, like, good on them. It's good to be self-aware enough to recognize that, the business needs something that's different to what you want to offer or can offer. But I also think it's really exciting to treat that as an opportunity to go on a growth journey yourself and to evolve, your capabilities and your mindset, and see the journey through to the end, because I personally found that super rewarding. So I think it's just something that I think it really helps the startups to have CTOs that can, grow and adapt as the startup is changing. And I think it's really, a wonderful experience for someone to get to see that journey from literally day one or two people, no process, no tools, nothing, all the way up to, oh, hang on, we've got a big bank about to buy us. Like, that's a really exciting journey to see it the whole way through. And I want to sort of help other people have that experience.
Yeah, I guess, whether you bring somebody on because if the current incumbent hasn't been able to adapt and change the way that they lead, the way that they code, the way that they run their teams, then the new person that comes along, they've got to learn all of the history of the business and why we got to where we are, so that they can make the best decisions. So either way, you've got somebody who has to learn a whole heap either the incumbent has to learn to adjust the way that they're leading and the way that they're building the software and the way that they're thinking about the business, or the new person has to learn all the history and the technology and the business domain and where everything is. So either way, you've got this massive barrier of learning.
Yep.
Why not try and get the people that keep the domain knowledge with them and the business and the cultural knowledge if you possibly can?
100%. 100%. I think the continuity can be really valuable. I think that a lot of people have had a really negative experience with it, though, because they've seen people hold on much longer than they should have, and they've seen them not adapt. So they've continued trying to run it the way they used to run it. They've continued, resisting efforts to put in place better process or quality, and they still kind of hold on to, the knowledge that they had. And that's, I think in that case, if they're unable to adapt, it's better to bring someone else in. But I kind of think, hey, if you could leverage the benefits of their experience, but also have them adapt and learn and grow, then you get the best of both worlds. So, I think, exactly what you were just saying.
Yeah, and this is a good, Daryl put this comment, role/titles versus functions. This is kind of exactly what we're talking about here. When you're that startup CTO of a 3-person startup, then you've got exactly the same job title as when you're the CTO of a 20-person startup, and exactly the same job title as when you're a 200-person startup, but the functions and the things you do within the organization drastically change.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a bit of a mental model around titles and things, and that's that titles tend to serve 3 purposes, and they're quite disjoint. One of them is to serve as the description of how other people in the business can understand your responsibility and what they can expect from you and what you're accountable for within the business. One of them is when you're representing the business, so maybe you're talking to like new candidates or new hires, or maybe you're talking to sales prospects. So the title that you carry with that affects those conversations and how you're perceived. And then the last one is the title that you want to have on LinkedIn to help you get your next job. And it's not always like, it is often the case that you want to have a different title in each of those 3 situations. And I've not come across any company that's actually facilitated that. But I've often observed that, people want the title for their next job on LinkedIn, and that just causes confusion in relation to what they're actually doing or how they're functioning within the company. And it's maybe hampering their ability to make effective sales calls, or to help people understand what they can expect when they're going through a recruitment process. So I think so. That's one lens on the whole title question. But I think the other one, and maybe more where Daryl was going, is exactly how you're talking about your responsibilities adapt. And so when you're in the early days, it's very much like you're just wearing a ton of hats. You're constantly switching between developing and QA and technical support, and maybe doing sales as well, and hopefully also contributing to strategy and sort of more executive level things. But then over time, you tend to sort of distribute that, delegate it, start to bring in people who take over some of those functions. And so I think one of the the things about being adaptable is recognizing about with yourself, what are your strengths, what's going to make sense to delegate to someone who's got complementary strengths, so that you can get the best out of both of you. And being willing to let go of that when it's the right time is important. But I don't know. I don't know if Daryl had other lenses to the question that he was asking, but hopefully that sort of speaks to it.
Yeah, please feel free to make comments as well as questions in the chat, and we'll discuss those. We had a live stream a couple of months ago with Michael Lopp, also known as his online pseudonym Rans, on delegation, and the title of that was "Delegate Until It Hurts." I think that's kind of the extreme end of the spectrum, and we kind of discussed that is the North Star, but it's not always the exact place you need to be. That's a great live stream if anybody wants to go back and have a look at it. So I kind of like to have a combination of stories and case studies along with actionable kind of do this thing tomorrow on this live stream. So let's start off with one of those stories. Can you tell us a situation in your personal experience where focusing on your own adaptability made you a more effective CTO?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, well, there's an endless list of challenges we've faced over the years. But I guess focusing on one that was about adaptability, and it was a big challenge for me. It took me a long time to sort of both get through the situation and to sort of reflect later on what had happened. But it was about one of these situations where I'd sort of hired someone into a role. And, in some respects, I kind of over-indexed on, I was so nervous about being the CTO that wouldn't let go of anything that I almost gave the person too much space and too much scope. And, one of the things I sort of learned through that was, people often benefit from some clear expectations and structure. And there's a fine line between delegating responsibility or accountability and just letting people dangle in the wind, so I think the struggle I had there was like, I was trying not to be the CTO that wouldn't let go, so much so that I didn't realize that actually I still had a responsibility to provide clear expectations, clear guidance, clear structure around, what should work, and finding that, or fine tuning that balance between, the decisions that you should still own, and the scope that you should give people, not because you don't want them to have, maximum autonomy or authority, but because you want them to have clarity over, how they can best contribute when they don't have all the information that you have. That was something I struggled with. And so, yeah, it took me, I think in that situation, actually, I didn't really nail it. It didn't work out so well. The person ended up leaving. But it was a real wake up call to me. And it sort of helped me realize, it's not just one way or the other. You shouldn't be extreme in either direction. You've got to be more nuanced and sophisticated in how you think about that act of delegation and the act of creating a safe space for people to, to be autonomous and to explore their goals, but with the confidence that they're doing it in a way that's useful and valuable to the broader context that they're operating in. And, I really missed the mark on that one in the first instance, but I think I got better at it over time.
Yeah, it's one of the things as leaders, we said this a few times on the live streams, but one of the downsides of being a leader is when you make mistakes, you make those mistakes on people, with people. And it's just one of those things that we just need to be conscious of all the time. But there's just finding those safe places to practice this stuff where we can. But sometimes we have to learn, and sometimes we have to kind of do it, and we have no other choice. And it's really important when those mistakes are made to sit back, reflect, and kind of go, oh yeah, this was a mistake. What am I going to learn from it, and how can I do better, rather than just trying to brush it under the carpet?
Yeah, 100%. But a bit of nuance to that, though. Like, I think in the tech sector, we've kind of maybe overemphasized the value of learning from mistakes and underemphasized the value of learning traditionally. Like, I'm not saying, like, mistakes are a valuable source of learning, and we need to make sure that if we make a mistake, we don't like beat ourselves up about it, but we do try and learn from it. And often there are situations where you've got no choice but to try something and see how it goes and to learn. But I do also think that, in this pursuit of like learning through doing and making mistakes and learning from our mistakes, a lot of people have forgotten, but there's other ways to learn too. You can read some books, you can talk to mentors and coaches, you can take some training courses. You can avoid some of these mistakes completely by going through these other channels too. And it's not to say that the lesson will land as hard as it would if you didn't experience it yourself, but I think we should embrace a plurality of modes of learning, not just the screw up until you get better kind of mode.
Unsurprisingly, as somebody who runs an online learning platform, I totally agree with that.
I thought you might.
So when we're leaders, and especially executives at a startup, and we're kind of indexing towards adaptability, part of the reasons we do that is because things are constantly changing. There's changing market conditions, there's changes in the business, changes in competitors, changes in customer behavior, changes in the people that we have available that we need to adapt to and kind of respond to. How do we balance this long-term goal of whatever we have in the business, this strategy we're putting together, this North Star we're heading towards? How do we balance those longer-term desires and objectives while also being adaptable and kind of staying responsive to what's happening?
It's a good question. So the way that I've sort of evolved my thinking around this is that I try and frame these objectives differently depending on timescale and you know, like you call them strategic versus tactical or adaptive responses. And the critical point is that your strategic goals need to be like outcome oriented. And I think this is a really important thing. It's actually like, you know, one of the key fundamental principles that's often missed when setting up things like OKRs and stuff is that you want to be looking around, you know, your objective in the sense of like what impact you're trying to have, you know, what outcome you're trying to achieve with respect to your customers or, you know, your broader mission or purpose in life. And what that means is that often you don't have to like compromise when you're being adaptive in the short term, because you're looking for things where, yeah, I'm reacting to a situation, but I'm being guided by my strategic objectives in such a way that I can be adaptive in the moment and still be aligned with those objectives. Where people fall over is when their objectives are too concrete in the long term, and the situation of the day is pushing you in a certain direction, and you feel this conflict because, you know, you can't know for sure exactly what concrete things you need to be doing in a year, but you can say, well, as long as I'm achieving these goals in a year, I can adapt my tactics as I go. And that's really helped me both personally, but also in helping guide, you know, product development and technical strategy, you know, helping people realize like it's okay to change your approach. It's okay to change your direction. I used to do this session for our company called like, you know, an introduction to like agile principles, because I found that a lot of people were, you know, trained up in agile by a certification factory and not really understanding the key, you know, mental models behind it. And one of the things I used to draw is like, you know, this chart saying, okay, we're starting here and we want to get to here. And, you know, the traditional ways you sort of go, you point a line there and you go, okay, we'll keep going that direction. But then it turns out actually where you needed to be was over here and you're completely in the wrong direction. Whereas with agile and agility and, you know, feedback orientation, you can sort of draw a chart where you're constantly zigzagging around, and maybe sometimes you're going backwards this way, that way, the other, but because you're constantly testing and sense checking and putting these feedback loops in place, you actually find your way to the place you need it to be, because it's impossible to know what the concrete world is going to look like if you've achieved a more abstract objective. But if you hold on to that objective and it's connected to your mission and your purpose, and you be flexible and adaptable around the concrete things that you're doing, you know, this can really strike balance in my experience.
I want to touch on, you mentioned the OKRs, and you know, one of the things people often have questions about is the difference in the role between OKRs and KPIs. And I think this conversation of the difference between being sort of short-term focused and long-term focused is a good illustration of where they can be useful and separate. Exactly as you're saying, OKRs are outcome focused. You know, they're the thing you want to achieve at a larger outcome based thing. But KPIs are often really useful for health metrics, some check of the business to make sure things are working well. And so I kind of see OKRs as my longer term strategic outcome based measures or strategy, and KPIs as my, let's just make sure the business is healthy and tracking and working towards it. And so, you know, if one of my KPIs fails, say, you know, meantime to production, or, you know, whatever that metric is, I know that I've got something tactical and local I need to look at, that I need to be adapted and respond to, whereas my OKRs are my more long-term objective focus.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think there's a good parallel here actually between those sort of like organizational main ways of measuring and things like, you know, the things that we see in like observability, you know, particularly with the introduction of things like SRE, site reliability engineering, and service level objectives versus like traditional monitoring metrics. I see a strong analogy between service level objectives and OKRs being around these outcomes and business goals, and then traditional monitoring metrics and KPIs being those more tactical or concrete measures that are like indicators, but not, you know, not necessarily the thing that really matters. And you need to pay attention to them because they can give you great signals and great information. You need to be sensitive to, are they leading or lagging, and by how much, and what's the sensitivity and all that sort of stuff. But, you know, that parallel between outcome and action is, I see that in a number of different frames, whether it's SRE or leadership and management business structure. So yeah.
Yeah, I've never thought about that. Yeah, thank you for that. That just slotted into my brain very nicely. Is yeah, that
Cool.
makes a lot of sense because one of the things with KPIs is it's the the derivative, the direction of velocity that often gives you cause for concern, and it could be exactly the same with uptime metrics. It's not necessarily that uptime is 99.98, but it's the fact that it was 99.999 and then 99.995 and then like
Yeah.
it's the velocity, not necessarily the
Mm.
position. Cool. Okay. So next on my list of questions,
Mhm.
like I said, I want to give people some very specific, actionable things here. So if we try and think of the skills, the behaviors, the things that leaders need to do in order to become more adaptable, can you give some concrete examples, some concrete situations? I'm thinking here along the lines of things like if you find yourself with too much time, it's time to delegate, or if you've come across something in the business that you don't understand and people are looking at you to get an answer, what should you do at that point? Like those kinds of I guess indicators that we need to
Mm.
change the way that we're being.
Yeah. Look, I think so. I've there's probably two different layers of thinking about this for me, and one is a bit more structured and concrete. So I have a framework that I use in my coaching, which is around guiding startup CTOs through the growth journey of their business, and it's really tied to, um, really the team size. So as a proxy for growth, and it speaks to like the kind of skills that you should be focusing on and the strengths you should be cultivating at each stage of growth. So it starts with like when you're working as an individual or in a very small team, you're basically one of the founders. You're kind of doing a lot of stuff, and you need to be bringing a lot of strengths around being entrepreneurial, but you also need to be driving being the builder of the technology. You need to be thinking about things as a business leader, like paying attention to the finances of the business. You also probably need to get involved in sales, but you also need to be paying attention to like risk and appropriate risk management. And this is this is like kind of calling back to the thing I said at the start of the hour, which was about this observation that's out there in the zeitgeist that startups don't need a CTO. And I'm like, well, if they're only building the tech, then yeah, maybe don't call them a CTO, but give them the opportunity to engage in these other ways. Give them the chance to bring some entrepreneurial thinking to the product vision. Give them a chance to get involved in sales. Make sure that they're thinking about risk and aware of and understanding the financial position of the business. And then I think you do have a CTO, even though they don't have anyone reporting to them yet. They're contributing it as an executive level. And then so one of the sort of transition points then is like, now you're growing a team. So you add all the responsibilities of an engineering manager and a tech lead to all of that other stuff. And maybe you're able to hire a tech lead, but you start to bring in place some more leadership things. You have to be able to recruit and hire the team and be a team builder. You need to start setting the culture, becoming the custodian of the culture, like energizing people and keeping them motivated, and driving the institution of some basic processes. And then and this can sort of help get you through that phase where you scaled up to like still a pretty small number. Like people would work in organizations with thousands of developers, and I say, oh, there's all these challenges when you've only got 6 developers, and they're probably thinking, what are you talking about? Like 6 must be easy. I'm like, well, it's not really, because you're running those 6 on a smell of an oily rag, and you've got this runway that's staring down the barrel of a gun at you, and you're trying to get lots of stuff launched quickly. So these are all really important skills to like build and adapt into. And then as you start to grow even further, and you end up with multiple teams, so you end up with like a proper division or a department, even though it's like the whole company. And what's often happened there is that the company's grown around you, so you start to need to develop more like situational awareness, which is my nice way of describing political acumen. Sort of knowing what other people care about, thinking about what their agendas are. You need to be thinking about the architecture of the system, how that's evolving and adapting as your team structure changes, and whether it's clear for people what parts of the system they own and all this kind of stuff. You're probably starting to play more of a role as like a talent brand ambassador rather than just being a recruiter. And you're thinking more about how's the process scaling, and maybe you've delegated that to an engineering manager or a VP of engineering or something like that, but you're still accountable ultimately for the effective like utilization of all of this like expensive like people, so I think that's an important thing, and your culture is really becoming even more important there. So I think this 3-step model is one that I use, and like, I know it's not exactly the question you asked, but I think that it's, you talk about adaptability skills. So these aren't exactly adaptability skills, that I think that they're a framework for the skills that need to be developed and emphasized at different stages of the journey. In terms of being adaptable, well, firstly, I mean, there's the ability and interest to acquire and actually adopt, to grow the strengths in these skills and to learn about them and so on. And that's a key thing. But I think, and it kind of, the way that you framed the question started to call, reference the other key thing that I think is really important, which is just noticing that you need to change. This is part of why I set up this framework, because it's really easy to tell that you need to change when you've gone from 1 person to 6 people, or 6 people to 18 or 24 people. Like, those transition points are really obvious. But I think that I do encourage people to cultivate a more nuanced sense of like, what are the things that, what are the signals, as you sort of referring to, that help you identify that maybe, you need to adjust your approach. And I think that, some of them were kind of called in that thing, and particularly the one about situational awareness. So what I mean by situational awareness is not just being like inwardly focused on the tech that you're building or the code that you're building, but understanding that you're part of an organization, and there are now other key stakeholders in the organization. There's going to be people running sales. There's going to be people running, customer service or success. There's going to be, like support people. There's going to be marketing people. Like, there's going to be a whole bunch of people in the company at this point. And it's really important that you understand what is important to them, and whether your team, whether you are delivering what they want. And I think that sensitivity is a key indicator of if you're, if you and your team are actually satisfying the needs of this organization. And to be able to sense whether you are or not relies on you having good relationships with these people and building trust with them, so that they can give you the feedback that you need to find out whether there's a gap in what's happening. And then either you start to adapt your own approach, or you start to, think that that's the opportunity for like recruiting, growing the team, like finding someone with complementary strengths who can balance me out and help grow the team. So there's like an outward direction to it. And then I always also think about adaptability in terms of like just pure leadership, because I think that as you're leading a team, you have to be really sensitive to what does that team need. Like, there's no one pure leadership style that is, it's going to work for all teams at all times. And so, one simple model that I've found effective there is, it's kind of inspired by the Tuckman model, the forming, storming, norming, performing. And it's about balancing that, dialing up and down how directive and how supportive you are. Because like in the early days, when you're still forming, people benefit from having a lot of direct direction. Like, they want clarity, they want guidance. And if they are still getting to know each other, it's helpful to give them some more structure within which to get to know each other. So, and it doesn't mean you have to do everything. It's to make sure that things are happening. But also, you want to be really supportive, because you're trying to set that culture up and create a supportive culture and give people, a sense that they're valued and that they belong. Then you go through the storming phase, and when that happens, you want to dial up the directiveness to try and help, like, really, push things through. But then as they get into sort of norming, you can start to dial the directiveness down, because they are starting to sort of work independently. And as they get into like performing, you can actually dial both of them down, directive and supportiveness, and be, far more like that, sort of letting them be autonomous. And so that's one way I think about adapting. And again, it's about sensing the need for the change, because Tuckman model is great as a really simplistic model, but the reality is no team goes linearly through these approaches, right? There's usually like half the team is performing and half of it's storming, or, they might go into norming and then back to storming and then into norming and back to storming a few times before they reach performing. So, again, noticing how the team is functioning, noticing, what's the relationships like, where's the trust, where's the psychological safety, and adapting your style, like how much direction, how much support you provide, and fine tuning it is, I think, another interesting lens on the adaptability question of how you sort of nurture teams through to that performing stage. So yeah, it's got a few different angles on that question, but I think, very interesting.
It sounds like a lot of what you're saying is kind of having this background thread running in your mind, which is, what should my role be? What are the gaps? What are the things that need to be done in the business? And should that be me? Should that be my team? Should I hire somebody in?
Yep.
that is that kind of, you know, a good model for somebody to have is to just constantly asking that
Yeah,
question.
100%. You need to be, it's a sensing thing. Like you need to be constantly sensing. And that's why I started with the conversation around situational awareness, because I think that's, to me, that phrase captures exactly what we're talking about. You are cultivating awareness of the situation that you're in, whether that's the situation of your team or the situation of the broader organization. And just like the first step is just being aware of it. And a lot of people often aren't, you know, they're lacking awareness of what's happening outside themselves. And so I think that's the very first step, that awareness. And then, you know, there's usually guidance available. And if you sense that something's wrong through cultivating situational awareness, you know, people are often open to conversations to help you work out how to respond to it. All the other stuff I talked about with that 3-step model and the type model and everything, like they're different mental tools that you can use to help you reason about how you adapt. But it really all starts at that sensing point and the situational awareness to actually notice that, you know, that change needs to happen.
I guess that's a good indicator for somebody who is in one of these executive roles. If they don't have the time to be situationally aware and to look into this stuff and ask and answer those questions, that's the first problem you need to fix. That's the first adaptation you need to make, is to carve that time out in order to be able to focus on understanding the business.
Yeah, and in my experience, it's not just time; it's often appetite, especially with technologists. I think it's probably the biggest gap in a lot of people that I see who you know, they've started out as developers. Maybe they became a tech leader, an engineering manager, and I meet a lot of them, and they say, "Oh, you know, I really want to be a CTO one day," and I kind of have to say to them, like, the CTO is not always just the best dev in the business. The CTO is often not the best dev in the business. The CTO is really good at talking to people and really good at building relationships and trust, both inside and outside the business, outside the engineering function. And it's that, yeah, you have to make time for it. You have to make time to connect with people, to build relationships with people across the organization and not just in engineering. But you also have to have the interest and appetite to do that. And often people don't, for whatever reason. And then I'm not judging that. Like, it's a, you know, that's a fair thing to say. Like you say, I'm more comfortable in my zone. But then I think you just really need to be aware that that's a really important part of being that CTO level, because you can't just be like head in the code all the time. You can't just be head in the observability pane. You've got to be building those relationships across the business. And yeah, and often those relationships are your first sort of channels for sensing that there's something that needs to change. So yeah, so I consider it so important.
Often when their organization grows as a CTO and they have to kind of hire somebody in to take over some of their responsibilities, often the people they hire are senior technologists to kind of take over some of the technology burden. Have you seen it successful the other way around, where the CTO wants to stay the most senior technologist and then hires in somebody theoretically underneath them to deal with the business and that side of things? Have you ever seen that be successful?
So there's 2 examples that come to my mind. I didn't see them personally, but I paid attention to them because they resonated with me in terms of like what they might want to do. And the first one was actually the business New Relic. So the guy that founded New Relic was a technologist, and he went and hired like a management team, and he just let them run the business, and he cut code a whole chunk of the day, because that's what he wanted to do. But then once a week he would have like a status review with them, and they would give him an update, and he would give them some basic direction. But he said, look, you can run this business better than I can. You should do it. But I still own it. I'm the founder. I want to be aware of it. And so that's one example where, like you said, he kind of hired them notionally underneath him, but then also notionally he was doing work that sort of had to report back through to them. It's a very complex balance to strike that a lot of people can't do. There's another one that more recently, which was Mitchell Hashimoto from HashiCorp, who he just recently said, he just made the call, I'm going to just be an IC. I just want to be an IC and do a bunch of cool stuff. And he had a whole management team in place. I'm not privy to the details of how that worked internally. I don't know whether he was, I mean, I'm assuming as a founder, he would have been on the board or maybe had some sort of shareholder access to, you know, other information that most developers didn't. But as I understood from what I read of how he wrote about it, he really was actually just giving up all management control of the business and went into the IC function. So I think that's probably a little bit more palatable to a lot of people. To like, it's hard to have these like inverted hierarchies and inverted power dynamics. A lot of people struggle with them. I kind of did end up in a little bit in that situation myself. Like, I really loved being a CTO, but I did find eventually I was getting a bit burnt out by that. And speaking of adaptable and speaking of recognizing when it's your time to sort of step aside, I reached a point where I realized, actually, I think the best value I can offer the business and to myself is to step into the role of being like a chief architect or a senior technologist, and like someone who provides a lot of L&D support to the business as well. So running training and onboarding training and stuff. And so we ended up appointing a new CTO. And I at the time tried to structure it really clearly that like I reported to him, like he didn't report to me. So I went more the Mitchell route with that. And, luckily we had a really good relationship. It worked really quite well, I think. It ended up only being in that case for about a year and a half or so before the acquisition happened. But still, I think, for the duration that it happened, it worked quite well. And I really enjoyed that transition out of it. I've been doing that job for a long time. I was ready for something new, a different focus, and it worked really well for me.
Yeah, that's great. I've definitely had a similar experience where I just wanted to stay a technologist, but for me, I wanted to deal with the people side of things and the business side of things and the technology side of things, all of them equally. And I just got to a point where I couldn't. And I just had to give up the technology stuff, and it's a really, really hard thing, when you've been an engineer for years and years and you're really good at it. Like I was a good engineer, not the best engineer, but I was good. And then to have to stop doing something that I was good at and got a lot of personal value from, and start doing and learning skills which were new to me. Learning accounting, learning the basics of accounting, and the difference between EBITDA and net profit, and all of this stuff that when you're running a business you've got to know, as
Absolutely.
opposed to running a software stack. It's just it's brand new things that you have to learn.
Yeah, this is why I recommend that some of that stuff, that if you're going to be a startup CTO, you should be learning that stuff at the start, because you want to be paying attention to the business financials right from the beginning. You want to understand your runway. You want to understand the fundraising that's going on. You want to understand, can you contribute to the fundraising? I think that's really valuable, even in the very early days. And that puts you in a good position to be able to cope with that expectation that you participate in that level as the business grows and grows, and you become, I guess, a more traditional CTO. And I think related to that, another aspect of all of this, I think there's another thing that sort of technologists finding themselves in this role struggle with, particularly in those senior roles, is like board reporting and understanding what boards and other people in that sort of position want to know about. And again, it sort of speaks to that point around outcome versus tactics, because often you see technologists coming with a board report that's a bunch of metrics and graphs that, and like sprint plans or burn down charts or whatever. And the board's like, we just don't care about it, or we can't interpret it. We don't have the skills or experience to interpret it. So they're looking for that translation layer to like, but what does this mean for the company? Are we going to be able to deliver what our customers are expecting? Are we going to achieve these goals and objectives? And I think that's, again, something that I try and coach people to start cultivating very early, because even when you don't have a big team, especially if you've taken some investors, they want you to take them on the journey of what you're spending their money on. And so it is a skill that you can learn even earlier. So this is that interesting dynamic with, like, if you're in the fortunate position of being a CTO about it right from the early days, you do get the chance to actually learn and build these skills even whilst you're simultaneously cutting code and building a system. And then it's actually later then that other skills like people leadership become more important, because you don't need people leadership skills until you've got a team, but you still need to be able to talk to investors right from the start. So it's a bit, I think sometimes when I explain that to people, they're a bit surprised by the sequencing of that, but it actually, in my experience, is really, really relevant.
If you're listening to this and you're not a startup CTO, and you're somebody who's, say, a tech lead or an engineering manager, I still think there's huge value in understanding a lot of these concepts, because they're going to make you better at what you're doing. This understanding of what are we actually doing and why are we doing it? How does it fit into the larger business, being able to have conversations about the outcomes your team are producing as opposed to just the outputs they're creating. All of this stuff is going to do you really, really good service to understand, even if you're not a startup CTO.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, it's exactly why I find myself drawn so much to the discipline of domain-driven design, because even when I'm focusing purely on the technology, domain-driven design is the one sort of discipline and approach that keeps connecting you back to the business purpose and mission. One of the things I do these days is I train to do strategic domain-driven design. We actually spend the whole first day talking about the business model, because it's basically trying to say, like, you can't be an effective architect unless you understand the business model. Do you understand what the costs and revenue drivers of the business are? Do you understand what the value proposition, who the different customer segments are? And actually understanding that can actually make you a hugely more effective technologist, both as an architect and a tech lead and a developer. You can make more effective planning recommendations around how you're going to slice release iterations if you understand the customer base better. You can collaborate more effectively with BAs and product owners if you are able to speak the language that they and the customers are speaking. So I 100% agree, Andrew. Like, it's not just for CTOs. Like, this is something that can be a superpower at every point in your career.
Yeah, if you have a good relationship with the rest of the people in your team, that are, say, the product managers or the UX researchers or the product owners, talk to them. They would love to take you through this stuff and to have you understand it. Like, it makes their jobs easier, makes your jobs easier, and it builds trust. Like, one of the things not to be dismissed as you kind of progress in your leadership journey are the trust and the relationships of people that you build outside of engineering. The higher up you are in an organization, the larger the team you oversee, the less your role becomes about core engineering concepts, and the more it kind of becomes about how you coordinate with the rest of the company and the other departments, the other department heads. And learning and practice is going to give you many benefits as you progress in your leadership career.
Yeah, and I have a view on the topic of trust as well, which I think is another one that is quite helpful, or potentially quite helpful to people at any stage in their journey, which is that trust is engendered by like delivering what you say you're going to, whatever that means. So it doesn't just mean delivering software, but it means if you say you're going to do something and you do it, that creates, and especially if people see that a couple of times, that creates trust. That is literally the thing that, like, follow through on your words, like have your actions match your words, is the fundamental underlying mechanism that generates trust. And if you really care, like if you pay attention to that and think intentionally around, how do I make sure that what I'm saying and what I'm doing match each other, you'll actually just by default be someone that people trust, and you'll build trust automatically with people.
Yeah. And trust is built in tiny little drops and spent in massive waves.
Absolutely.
So being intentional with how you build trust is important. Yeah. We are rapidly reaching the top end of the hour. We've probably only got about 5 minutes of this live stream left. So if you do have a question for Chris or I, please put it in the comments wherever you're watching this, and we'll hopefully get to it before the end of the live stream. The last question I have for you is, give me an actionable tip that somebody can do tomorrow. So if it's not tomorrow because it's Friday, on Monday. Give me an actionable tip somebody can take on Monday. They're going to come in work 9 o'clock on Monday, refreshed from the weekend. What's a question they can ask themselves? What's an activity they can do? What's something that they can action based on what we've just spent the past 40?
Yeah, so I think the thing that would benefit anybody, no matter what your role, is to go into work on Monday, pick someone else in the company outside of the engineering department, and try and have a conversation with them and ask them about their job, ask them about what matters to them, ask them, like, what they're working on at the moment, what challenges they're facing, what they're struggling with. And that's just that one step, and then cultivating a habit of doing that will make you a better technologist, 100%. Like understanding the environment you're in, the reason you're building what you're building, the people who are using it, and how it's affecting them. is just fundamental. And I honestly think it's far more important than developing skills in a particular language or framework, or you know, or even some. I love TDD and I love DDD, but I fully endorse them and recommend them. But I think even more important than that is that human relationships element. And so if you go in on to work on Monday and you pick someone in your company that you don't know very well, or you've not spoken to before, and you take that really brave step, but I'm going to call it out as brave, because it's a really hard thing to do for a lot of us, to just sort of reach out of the blue and say, hey, you know, I'm just trying to understand this business a bit better. Would you have a few minutes for us to have a coffee or to chat, or to just tell me about what you do in the business? And then start doing that more and more. Like, you'll be amazed the impact it has on your ability to make effective decisions and to contribute meaningfully to what your team's trying to do.
I love that. And if you're a startup CTO, that person could be your co-founder, or one of your first hires, and that's gonna give you that visibility over when you need to adapt as a startup CTO. When their when their answers to your question starts changing, you know that it's time for you to start changing and thinking differently about the business.
100%.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much, Chris, for joining me. I just want to end the live stream, as we always do, with the next live stream that we're running. So next, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be joined by April Lee. We're going to talk about embracing neurodiversity as a tech leader. So this is from both sides of neurodiversity. We're going to hopefully have an interesting conversation about leading diverse teams, but also being a neurodiverse leader, because both of those are interconnected and fascinating and interesting. And both April and I have spent a lot of time thinking about both of those particular topics. That's going to be an amazing conversation. If you want to know a little bit more about me, if this is your first live stream, you can scan that QR code in the middle, or I'll put some links up on the chat afterwards, or you can follow me on LinkedIn. I do these live streams fortnightly. If you want to make sure you get notified about these live streams, sign up to my newsletter. None of the platforms are great at ensuring you get a notification about the live streams, so please subscribe to the newsletter. And also, if you want to grab 20 minutes with me, please scan that first QR code. We can talk about anything you want to talk about. Chris, is there anywhere you want to send people, anything you want them to know about you? You've obviously got your website in the tagline there. Do you want to?
Yeah, look, that's a good place to start.
Let them know about anything
That's a good place to start. If you go to chrissimon.de, there's a bunch of stuff there. If you want to chat to me about any of the things we talked about today, I'm really always open for a chat with people. There's one topic in particular I'm really open to a chat with people about at the moment, I wouldn't mind mentioning, which is that I have, I think it's always been something I've really cared about, but over the last 6 to 12 months, I've been making more of an effort to be more proactive and visible about it. And that's the concept of allyship in the technology world, and particularly about, putting in place proactive measures to address things around gender inequality, whether that's improving diversity in your teams, but also like creating safe spaces and, addressing, like, let's be honest, the historically pretty rubbish record that our sector has of treating people who are not like the dominant people. And as someone who is probably a representative of that dominant group, I feel a deep responsibility to try and improve the situation for anyone who's been affected by systemic discrimination. So on my website, there's a title bar, allyship. Please do check that out and read it. And if you want to have a chat with me, I offer free one-on-one chats with anybody who wants to talk about being better allies. And I call it peer support, because I don't claim to be an expert in this space. I'm learning as I go. I would love to learn from your stories as well. I'd really, really excited to have more chats with people about this topic, and especially anyone who's in an environment where they think that they could do better, but they aren't sure how to. I'd really love to talk to you about that. So yeah, that's probably the one big thing I'd really love for people to reach out to me about.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's really hard not knowing where to start and fearing that you're going to make a mistake, and just even talking about that with somebody else and trying to get over that fear of starting to help, I think is a really great place to help people. So yeah, definitely encourage everybody to reach out to Chris on that. Okay, thank you everybody for joining me on another Tech Leaders live stream. Thank you, Chris, for joining me, and we'll see you all again